getting the part of Annie Walker mustn't have been such an honour for you.
Oh, indeed not, dear. I played his son, and he made me the King of Rome. No, because, you see, I'd been connected with the theatre since I was born, really.
Doris, for God's sake, I'm not made of stone. And we've been very close ever since then.
This is the story of how a tabloid newspaper destroyed one of British television's most beloved characters, and the actress who played her never recovered. The Daily Mirror revealed in October '83 that Doris Speed was 84 years old, not 69 as she'd claimed, and she collapsed on the Coronation Street set when the news broke. 23 years as Annie Walker, the imperious landlady of the Rover's return, ended without a farewell episode, without a goodbye scene, without anything at all.
You can't rehearse majesty, Mr. Tetlock. It's either something you've got or you haven't.
The truth behind why she couldn't return turned out to be far more tragic than anyone knew at the time. Episode 1 of Coronation Street aired on the 9th of December 1960, and from that very first broadcast, Doris Speed created something extraordinary. Annie wasn't just a pub landlady running a backstreet boozer. She was a woman convinced she deserved far better than pouring pints in Weatherfield. Delusions of grandeur drove her, exaggerated refinement colored every word she spoke, and she looked down her nose at half the street without shame.
Note I've always shunned snobbishness, but there are limits to how far one can condescend.
You're dead right, Mrs. Walker.
The Daily Telegraph later called her the embodiment of the genteel social climber, an icon of the proud petit bourgeois tidiness, which is a fancy way of saying she was a snob who we loved despite ourselves. The irony runs deep when you consider that Doris Speed herself was nothing like Annie Walker. Speed supported Labour, called herself a socialist, and didn't even like pubs. She once admitted, "She stood for everything I'm not," and that's what made her performance so brilliant. Studying Annie constantly kept silly mannerisms from creeping in, and she wasn't playing herself, but rather a character based largely on her Aunt Bessie, who had a withering look and led the family Christmas charades with an iron fist.
But I do know I've been a very fortunate woman. With your father, of course, and with my children.
Tony Warren wrote the role specifically for Doris Speed, after seeing her perform in the late 1940s when he was just 12 years old. The memory of her talent never left him, and when Coronation Street was being cast, he knew exactly who should play Annie Walker. What makes this remarkable is that 57 actresses had already auditioned unsuccessfully before Speed was even approached. And when Granada finally contacted her, she turned them down twice because she found the journey from Manchester to Granada Studios such a long way to travel. 3 weeks was all they offered when she finally agreed to audition. Those 3 weeks became 23 years. Chorlton, Lancashire, it saw the birth of Doris Speed on the 3rd of February 1899, and her parents George and Ada Speed made their living as touring vaudeville performers.
I found this whole conversation rather sordid and disgusting.
Well, you started it.
Young Doris changed schools almost weekly as the family traveled, which made for a nomadic childhood that few could understand. Her stage debut came at 3 years old when she sang a song about a gollywog whilst wearing a nightdress, and by age 5 she was playing the infant Prince of Rome in a Victorian melodrama called The Royal Divorce. That theatrical start didn't prevent her from spending 41 years working as a clerk at Guinness Brewery in Manchester, where she rose to personal assistant to the regional manager whilst pursuing amateur dramatics on the side. Coronation Street began when she was 61 years old, though she told everyone she was 46. The Rover's return gave Annie Walker a position that made her absolutely central to the show's storytelling for over 2 decades.
Oh, come on, Mrs. Walker, be a sport.
I refuse to encourage you in vulgar horseplay.
Her fictional marriage to Jack Walker happened on the 23rd of October, 1937, and together they became the pub's longest ever serving publicans with a 33-year reign that defined an era. Arthur Leslie, who played Jack, died in real life in July 1970, which meant his character had to die from a heart attack on screen. Annie became a widow, and the writers gave her storylines about learning to cope alone, eventually learning to drive and passing her test first time, buying herself a Rover 2000, becoming mayoress of Weatherfield to Alf Roberts' mayor in '73 gave Annie one of her proudest moments, and it was perfect for her character because all that social climbing finally paid off in spectacular fashion. Her troubled relationship with her spoiled son Billy drove numerous plots over the years, keeping viewers invested in her family drama.
Walker!
What a woman, eh? A foaming tankard will be waiting on this bar for you.
The brewery hosted a party in '77, celebrating her 4 decades as landlady. And these weren't just storylines, but events that millions of viewers cared about emotionally. Fan mail arrived at Granada Television in greater volume for Speed than for any other Coronation Street cast member, and the press dubbed her the Queen Mother of Soap with affection and respect. Nancy Banks Smith of The Guardian perfectly captured Annie's essence when she wrote, "Nobody answered her back and stayed to finish their pint. Everybody called her Mrs. Walker except her husband, and he called her the Mrs. She thought that was common." Something was clearly wrong by 1982, and colleagues noticed Speed had become vague, distant and forgetful when delivering her lines. Julie Goodyear, who played Bet Lynch, reportedly started writing Speed's lines on her own arms to prompt her during scenes, which was an act of kindness that kept the show running. One crew member later said, "After years of putting in a perfect performance, she could be reduced to crying if a scene took 2 or 3 attempts." And the production team responded by giving her lesser storylines to ease the pressure. Everyone hoped she'd recover, but what happened next wasn't about her health at all. October 1983 brought the Daily Mirror story that shattered Doris Speed's world when they published information from her birth certificate proving she was born in 1899, not 1914. The numbers told the brutal truth. She wasn't 69 years old, but 84. And for over 2 decades, she'd maintained this deception with remarkable consistency. Her MBE ceremony in '77 had articles stating she was 63, and when she joined Coronation Street in 1960, she'd claimed to be 46. Every interview, every public appearance, every official document had perpetuated the lie, and now everyone knew the truth. The Sun reported on the 1st of October '83 that crisis-torn Coronation Street has been rocked yet again by the collapse of actress Doris Speed in the TV studios, and she'd collapsed on set with stomach pains after learning about the article. A friend later revealed, "It broke her spirit completely. She would never go back on the street after that." And those words proved prophetic in ways nobody wanted to believe. Hospitalization followed, and Granada quickly wrote Annie out to give her time to recover, hoping desperately that she'd come back to the show. Everyone hoped she'd come back, because Annie Walker without Doris Speed seemed impossible to imagine. Her hearing had declined significantly following the collapse, and the stress caused what doctors described as a minor breakdown. Becoming increasingly reclusive as she grew terrified of public scrutiny, and the woman who'd once commanded the Rover's return now couldn't face leaving her home. Episode 2, 1351, aired on the 12th of October 83, and contained her final broadcast appearance, and the scene was utterly unremarkable in every way. Annie attending a bring-and-buy sale gave her nothing dramatic to work with, and her final line to Rita Fairclough was, "Could you please give me 3 tins of anything so that I can discharge my duty and go?" She briefly met newcomer Percy Sugden in a forgettable exchange. 23 years, approximately 1,746 episodes, and that was how it ended, without fanfare, without farewell, without anything to mark the occasion. Speed stated initially that she intended to return, and Granada Television remained supportive throughout, and maintaining close contact with her, and genuinely hoping she'd be well enough to film again. Early '84 made it evident she probably wouldn't return, and by July '84, 9 months after her exit, her departure was confirmed as permanent. The hope had died slowly, painfully, as everyone realized Annie Walker was truly gone. The final blow came in 1985 when 2 intruders broke into her home in Chorlton-cum-Hardy while Speed was asleep upstairs. Waking to the sound of burglars, she called the police and locked herself in the bathroom whilst they stole or ruined precious possessions, including objects related to her mum. This trauma caused another breakdown that hospitalized her, and following her release, Speed moved to Highbank Nursing Home in Walshaw Bury, never returning to the house she'd called home. What happened to Annie Walker on screen remains one of the most controversial exits in Coronation Street history, because the character simply left to stay with her daughter Joan in Derby and never returned to say goodbye. January '84 saw Annie phoning the Rovers to put Betty Turpin in charge, and Billy Walker returned in March to help at the pub before announcing in July that his mother was bowing out after 47 years. No farewell party materialized, no emotional goodbye scene was filmed, no proper send-off was given to a character who'd been there since episode 1. Fans have complained about it for decades because the lack of closure felt like a betrayal. One critic noted, "As good as Corrie was in the early '80s, no long-term planning seems to have taken place. It is ridiculous that there was no plan for what to do with the Rovers once Doris Speed retired." The production had been caught completely off guard because they'd written her out temporarily, expecting her return, and when it became clear she wasn't coming back, they were left scrambling for solutions. Annie's character was never killed off on screen, though subsequent references used past tense, which implied her death without ever confirming it. A jarring retcon appeared in 2012 during Betty Williams's funeral episodes, revealing Annie had secretly bequeathed the Rovers to Betty in her will, though the pub was never actually Annie's to give. The whole thing was a narrative mess born from trying to honor a character who'd left without closure. Chaos erupted at the Rovers in the immediate aftermath. Art and Betty Turpin took temporary charge, whilst Fred G. unsuccessfully petitioned the brewery for the manager's job. Billy Walker returned in May '84, persuaded by Annie to keep the pub in the family name, but his tenure proved disastrous in every possible way. Police caught him hosting late-night drinking sessions, he sold supermarket ale to cut costs, and his dodgy practices forced him to sell within the year. December '84 saw the end of the Walker family's 47-year reign, which felt like the death of an era. Bette Lynch became Newton and Ridley's first unmarried landlady in January '85, when the brewery appointed her to the position after regulars signed a petition insisting she get it. The tonal shift was massive because Annie's refined, genteel pretensions gave way to Bette's brassy, working-class glamour, and it represented a major change in the show's personality. Critics felt it took years for the program to recover until new characters like the Duckworths Kevin Webster, Curly Watts, and Percy Sugden hit their stride. Others argued the show only truly recovered when Roy Barraclough joined full-time as Alec Gilroy. Highbank Nursing Home became Speed's residence for approximately 10 years, and she remained relatively well but deeply reclusive throughout that time. Only 3 notable public appearances followed her departure from the show, and each one was carefully chosen. The ITV telethon in '88 saw her looking frail but happy behind the bar, and she wryly commented that the old pumps were better at developing the cleavage, which got a laugh from everyone watching. December 1990 brought the 30th anniversary celebration of Coronation Street, when Speed was 91 years old, and host Cilla Black helped her onto stage, where she received a standing ovation from the cast. That moment was incredibly moving, because everyone in that room knew what she'd given to the program over 23 years. Her final television interview happened in '93, alongside Kenneth Farrington on classic Coronation Street, and she'd been due to attend a tribute to Coronation Street on the 28th of November '94 at Manchester Town Hall. Death came 12 days before that date. An afternoon nap on the 16th of November 1994 became Doris Speed's final rest when a staff member found her whilst collecting her afternoon tea tray. She'd been reading To Sir with Love by E.R. Braithwaite, and a cigarette was still burning at her side when they discovered her body. The nursing home owner said something remarkable about that day. What was remarkable was that she got up and put on her best dress and makeup. It is something she never did, unless she was expecting a guest. Nobody was due to see her yesterday, and I wonder if she knew what was going to happen. Speed had prepared herself for death as if it were a social engagement. 95 years old when she died, Speed reached exactly the same age at which her mother Ada had died in 1973, which seemed like fate deciding on a particular number. Her estate was valued at £514,192, equivalent to over £1 million today, and it reflected what colleagues called a lifetime of thrift from a woman who'd worked for 41 years at Guinness before becoming famous. The New Jerusalem Church in Kearsley Bolton hosted the funeral on the 23rd of November 1994, and the Swedenborgian service drew attendees including Jean Alexander, who played Hilda Ogden, Betty Driver, who played Betty Turpin, Julie Goodyear, and creator Tony Warren. Brian Moseley, who played Alf Roberts, gave a Bible reading, and Kenneth Farrington spoke. She was admired by the whole world. Blackley Cemetery in Manchester received her ashes after cremation. Granada Television issued a statement that read, "Because of Doris Speed's wonderful performance, the character of Annie Walker became one of the legends of Coronation Street and British TV. She maintained a close link with the program and Granada." The ITV tribute program that followed attracted 10.11 million viewers, which was higher than that week's blind date, proving the nation still cared deeply about Annie Walker. Recognition came to Speed in the form of her MBE in 1977 for services to television, and she won the Pi Television Award for Outstanding Contribution to Television in '79. The Licensed Victualers Association made her an honorary member, acknowledging her portrayal of a pub landlady had elevated their profession. Manchester installed 2 plaques to commemorate her: a Heritage Foundation plaque, placed outside Granada Studios in 2000, and a bronze plaque at 13 Sibson Road in Chorlton-cum-Hardy, just her longtime home, which Manchester City Council installed in 2011. A 2021 Radio Times poll voted Annie Walker the 7th best soap pub landlord, and modern comparisons see current character Jenny Connor described as a modern-day Annie Walker, which shows her influence persists decades later. The quotes from those who knew her paint a picture of a woman far more complex than her public persona suggested. Speed once said, "I study Annie to make sure that no silly mannerisms creep in. It's her I'm watching, not myself." And she also called Annie always a silly, vain woman, which seems brutally honest, given her own vanity about her age. Tony Warren put it simply, she was a superb actress and the most loyal of friends. Betty Driver remembered, a gentle lady, a quiet soul who lived with her mother. She didn't suffer fools, but was generous and kind-hearted. Jean Alexander noted, she played bridge like a professional and went through crosswords like a knife through butter. Writer Leslie Duxbury observed, Annie Walker was not a lady to be trifled with, and neither was Doris Speed. Annie Walker's own words captured her character perfectly. "My idea of heaven is doing a foxtrot on a French-chalked floor, knowing I look right." The tragedy of Doris Speed's story isn't just that a tabloid exposed her secret and humiliated her in front of millions. What makes it truly heartbreaking is that this gentle private woman, who disliked the limelight, spent 23 years creating one of British television's most memorable characters whilst hiding her true self behind not one, but two masks. Annie Walker's pretensions and her own deception about her age. When the Daily Mirror ripped those masks away, she had nothing left to hide behind, and the shame was simply too much to bear. That final public appearance in 1990 tells you everything you need to know. When aged 91, Cilla Black helped her onto that stage, and the Coronation Street cast gave her a standing ovation. They knew, as did millions of viewers, exactly what she'd created over 23 years. She'd made us laugh at Annie Walker's airs and graces, while somehow making us care about this silly, vain woman who thought she was too good for Weatherfield. Many landladies have run the Rover's return since Bet Lynch took over in '85. Some brilliant, some forgettable, but none of them were Annie Walker. None of them ever could be, because Doris Speed didn't just play a character. She created an icon of British class consciousness, simultaneously mocked and adored, aspirational and absurd. When a cruel tabloid exposed her secret, Britain lost not just Annie Walker, but the shy, brilliant actress who brought her to life. And the manner of that loss, sudden, undignified, without farewell, makes it hurt even more decades later.